Hello, hello, hello. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, Isabel.
Hey, how are you doing?
Getting myself set up here. I'm good. How are you?
Doing good.
This is my first time teaching for Girls Love to Fly, so I'm excited to be here.
So nice.
We are going to go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is my first Zoom for Girls Love to Fly.
Oh, good. So it's first for both of us. Excellent.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. So we're going to go over sectionals today and just sort of a crash course on how to read them. So if you don't mind sharing with me, where sort of are you in your pilot training journey, if you don't mind? I see we have somebody else on too, if you want to put in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm just curious to know where you are in your pilot training journey.
Well, for me, I am at the very, very beginning. I just joined like a week ago.
Okay.
And I haven't yet looked into the online material. I was talking to Jamie about maybe pushing back my flight lessons. I did the block time.
Okay.
But school has just been like so insane for me lately. And so I was thinking taking either a semester off or just doing like 1 or 2 classes. So I'll have a lot more time to fly. So yeah, definitely I'm just going to be done with school in 6 weeks. And then I want to really dive into this. And
okay, good.
Yeah, so like very, very beginning.
Very beginning. Okay, good. Yeah. And then I see we have somebody else on the iPhone. If you wanted to chime in, go ahead. If not, that's okay too. But yeah, that's very helpful for me to sort of just know where you are. And people might be watching the recording of this too. So I'm sort of approaching this from the standpoint of maybe you've seen a sectional, maybe you haven't seen a sectional. We're going to go over just sort of this crash course on sectionals. Always go back and rewatch the recording, ask questions, all that good stuff. Okay. So I have a PowerPoint here that I'm going to bring up, but we're actually going to read some sectionals. I'm going to bring up a few things here. Okay, I need to share my screen. Make sure I get the right one. Okay. All right, so you should see a sectional on the screen right now, if it's working correctly. Is that working? Good. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I have a PowerPoint here. I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the PowerPoint and a website called SkyVector. And SkyVector is a free website that you can go to where you can look at all of the different the sectional charts. So for those of you who don't know what a sectional chart is, you might hear it called a VFR sectional. You'll hear them called charts. You'll hear them called sectional charts. There are all sorts of different terms that are used here. But essentially what a VFR sectional chart is, it's a map of the skies for pilots is really what it is. So much like you have an atlas or Google Maps for understanding the highway system here in the United States, we also have sectional charts to help pilots understand the airspace system in the United States and some of the rules and procedures for coming into certain airports, all that good stuff. So we're going to go, like I said, this is going to be a crash course. These are somewhat, they're somewhat difficult to read, but they're difficult to read in the sense that most people coming in when they're getting their pilot's license are, you're familiar with driving. A lot of people most people are familiar with driving and how to navigate the highway system. Now, when we're looking at airspace and charts, we're looking at things in 3 dimensions, but we've only got, the 1 dimension in front of us. We've either got the sheet of paper in front of us, or we've got our iPad screen with ForeFlight on it in front of us, right? But it's representing 3 dimensions, so it can get a little confusing sometimes. So like I said, crash course on this, if it's totally okay if you still are not super confident in using these. The sectionals are something that the more you use them, the more confident you'll feel with them. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction, who I am, and we'll do a sectional charts overview. We'll talk about reading the legend and the margins of the sectional charts. We'll talk about how to look up airport information, latitude and longitude, identifying different types of airspace. This is not going to be a course on airspace. We'll do a quick review of the different types of airspace, and then I'll show you how to identify them on sectionals, and then we'll talk about obstacles and terrain. So it's a lot of stuff. It's really jam-packed. So we'll get to it. If you have questions, feel free to either you can type in the chat, you can unmute yourself. I'm the kind of person that, you know, if you've got a question, let's get to it right away so that you aren't constantly, you're not just thinking about it as I'm moving on to the next topic. So if you have questions, feel free to chime in. So my name is Heather Monthy. I am a commercial pilot. I'm a CFI. I'm also a remote pilot. I have been a pilot since the 90s, and it is something that I have wanted to do since I was a child. I took a field trip to the airport when I was in kindergarten, and I became hooked on aviation. I'm not one of those people that came from a family of aviators. So it was really one of those, I was 5 years old and took a field trip to the airport and was completely obsessed. My parents said that that's all I ever talked about was airplanes. I was very fortunate to grow up near Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I grew up about 20 miles from there. And so when I was 7 years old, my family, my mom and my stepdad took me to Oshkosh for my very first time, and just fueled, quite literally fueled my passion for aviation. And my parents have always been really super supportive of it, even though it's not been something that they were ever really interested in. They were always trying to help me find opportunities to learn more about aviation. So I feel very thankful in that way. So I've been a CFI since 2002. And also became a remote pilot as well. I'm starting to teach more and more remote pilots about how to work in the same airspace systems that we are as manned pilots. I've also worked in STEM education and workforce development for over the last 20 years. I've also founded Fly Alpha Zulu Aviation Education and Educators Who Drone. And I'm also the host of the Let's Learn to Fly podcast. So that's a little bit about me. So let's talk about what VFR sectional charts are. So the FAA has a website that they're called VFR raster charts. So if I bring up their website here, and I'll put this in the chat if you want to bring it up for yourself and take a look at it. But this is the sort of official source of VFR sectional charts. I don't necessarily suggest using this just because these files are huge. They're divided up by the main city that's on that particular chart. So depending on where you are, where you're flying, you're going to use whatever chart is closest to you. So you can see here that we've got two different types of charts here. We've got the current edition and then the next edition. So this one here for Albuquerque is current as of September 8th, 2022. And then the next one will be published for November 3rd, 2022. So they're published every 56 days. They're always expire and always become valid on a Thursday. That's sort of the release date. And like I said, you can come here, you can download them. These are big files. I'm not going to download them right now because these are really big files, but this is where you can come to grab the VFR sectional charts. So you can see here, they got different tabs. They've got terminal area charts, which we're not going to go over today, but those are going to be much more detailed charts for larger airports, Class Bravo airports. They've got some helicopter charts for the Grand Canyon and the Caribbean. And so again, they come out every 56 days, except Alaska. They're usually about once a year that they come out with those. So if you go to this link here, this VFR raster charts, you can download these files, you can take a look at them, all that good stuff right there. And then the AIM chapter 9 also discusses aeronautical charts and related publications. So I do suggest reading through this. The AIM is, obviously one of the main sources of information for you. If you're not certain what the AIM is, it's the Aeronautical Information Manual. And it's sort of a supplement to the federal aviation regulations. It gives you some more guidance on how to do certain things. And so in the AIM is where we talk about all the different kinds of charts available, the information about them. This is an example here of where all of the sectional charts are that they publish. So like I live here in Arizona, so we've got a Phoenix VFR sectional chart. The areas in purple are going to be where they have those terminal area charts, which like I said, is going to be much more, they're very congested airspace. So it's a zoomed in, more detailed version of that particular area. And so yeah, so it's usually like the main city that's in that particular area is going to be the name of that chart. So you have to figure out where it is that you live, where it is that you fly. That's the chart that you're going to use. So like I said, around here, I use the Phoenix chart. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I use the Green Bay and the Chicago charts quite frequently. So the AIM is a really good place for you to go to read up more on sectional charts. And like I said, there's all these other different types of charts. We're not going to go over those today. The charts, because they are a printed document, you can either purchase an actual printed chart. They're huge. They're like 4 feet by 4 feet, and you fold them up, put them on your knee board in the airplane. Or a lot of people use something like ForeFlight, so you have a digital charts in the cockpit with you. But because the FAA publishes these every 56 days, there can be some changes that happen between, like, for example, we're looking at September 8th to November 3rd. There could be some changes that happen in between there. They're not going to necessarily print up a new chart. And maybe a new water tower was built, or maybe a new radio antenna was put up, something like that. What they'll do is they'll issue a NOTAM. So if something needs to change for the VFR sectional chart that is going to affect your flight, they'll update it via NOTAM or notice to air mission. And we also have these safety alert and charting notices. And this is where the FAA will publish any changes to the VFR sectional charts that might not necessarily affect your flight. So maybe something was spelled incorrectly, or maybe some of the boundaries were incorrect, something like that. You can see there's a couple in here that the boundaries were incorrect. This is where they'll publish any changes that will happen before that 56 days are up. So I'll put that link here for you as well. So just know that if there's something major that's going to affect your flight, like for example, they put up a new water tower, or there's a water tower that's up, but the light is burned out that's on top of it, that'll get published via NOTAM. Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
First of all, you're a badass. I love you talked so fast I couldn't tell you. So good job on all your
Thank you.
And then my question is, like, will we be using ForeFlight like mostly, and this would be our backup in case something happened with our electronics, or is this something that we will have to always have on top of having our apps?
Yeah, so this is what will be in ForeFlight. This is what you'll see in ForeFlight.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is not a paper that we're printing and taking. This is what we're going to see.
No, many examiners still want you to plan across country manually. So they'll have you use a printed paper chart, and you'll actually get a ruler and you'll draw the line between point A and point B, and you'll actually plan out the flight. But for the most part, a lot of people use ForeFlight. Totally okay to use ForeFlight, but this is what you're going to see in ForeFlight, is you're going to see the sectional charts. It's a digital version of the charts.
Okay, I understand. Thank you so much.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So in ForeFlight, you have the digital version of it. You'll see what we see in SkyVector, and I'll show you here in just a little bit. But when you get the printed version of your chart, there's going to be a legend and a margin, okay? And this is what a printed chart looks like. When you, like I said, this is a big document. It's like 4 feet by 4 feet, okay? And you can see it's kind of angled just because of the curvature of the Earth. And then they will connect to all of the other charts that are going to be around it. So like this example here, I've got the Green Bay sectional up. So to the west here, it will connect to the Twin Cities sectional. To the south, it'll connect to the Chicago sectional, right? So what you need to do, I have a copy of this right here. This is the Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement for Sport Pilot, Recreational Pilot, Remote Pilot, and Private Pilot. I don't know if you can see it here. It's about this thick or so. And this is the written exam supplement that you will use on the written exam. You can actually go and purchase this. You can get a free PDF of it off the FAA's website. You just search for Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement. So you can get a PDF of it, or you can just go on Amazon and purchase a printed copy of this. If you do purchase a printed copy, make sure you get one in color, because sectional charts are color coded. And I accidentally purchased one that was black and white. I had to return it. I didn't realize people were purchasing these or selling these in black and white. But like one example here, I've got a page that it's so hard to see. It's like zooming. It's like connecting with my background here. But one of the pages is an example of a chart, much like what you would see on a sectional chart. And that's where you will get questions on your written exam. So in this chart supplement, there's a couple different pages, or testing supplement, there's a couple different pages with the VFR sectional charts in there. Those are the sectionals that you will get questions on the written exam. For your oral exam and your practical test, your examiner will tell you beforehand what he or she wants you to do. Usually they want you to plan a cross-country flight, probably from the departure airport where you're taking your check ride. And so you would use that particular chart for that particular airport. So let's take a look at this. So I'm going to go ahead and go to this website here called SkyVector. So if you haven't used SkyVector before, this is a fantastic website to come and look at charts for free, and you can see where any of the charts that are out there. So if you look right here, I'm on the World VFR. That's what this means, is all the VFR charts have been sewn together, seamed together, so that it looks like one chart, okay? What you'll want to do is you'll want to figure out where it is that you're flying, where it is that you are maybe more familiar with. You know, I always suggest that when you are starting to read these, pick one that is of an area of the country that you're very comfortable with. Maybe it's the area that you lived and grew up in, or maybe it's the area that you live in right now, and you know that area very well. It's going to be a lot easier for you to pick out some of these things and identify some of these things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to go to Oshkosh. Many of us know about Oshkosh. Maybe you've not been there, but many of us know about Oshkosh due to the air show. And so this airport right here, Oshkosh Airport, is right here. It's on the border between the Green Bay and the Chicago sectional. So you can see right here, it's giving me the choice. Do I want to open up the Green Bay sectional, or do I want to open up the Chicago sectional? Because I just happen to know that those two sectionals overlap. So I'm going to open up the Green Bay sectional. So I just clicked on Green Bay right there. And what that does is that opens up a digital version of the printed copy, much like what you see here on the VFR raster charts page on the FAA's website. So if I come here, there's a Green Bay sectional. That's this file. That's essentially what this is, okay? And so again, when you have a printed copy of the sectional, there's going to be a lot of information for you in the legend of the sectional and in the margins. So the legend is going to be in the margin. So if you think back to, 4th, 5th grade, when you were learning how to read maps, the first thing is always go read the legend. Look at all the different symbols, figure out what all the different symbols mean. And then if you find something on the chart or the map that you don't know what it is, the first thing you should do is go look at that legend and see if it's on there. That's really what's going to help you, figure out what some of these things are. You're going to find things on here that you don't know what it is, or maybe it's things that you just haven't seen very frequently. Come over here to the legend to see if you can find the answer. So if you're on your check ride and the examiner asks you a question, like for example, one of the questions I think I got on my oral exam was, what do these little tick marks mean here on the airport? What does that mean? And I didn't know the answer. I didn't know what it was. So I came over here to the legend and I found it, and it indicates that there's fuel available at that particular airport. Okay. So some of these little sort of obscure little things you might not know, come over here to the legend. So we'll go over the legend here in just a little bit. But there's also other information that you can get in the margins from the sectional. So if this were folded up nice and neat, this is a printed piece of paper, is folded up nice and neat, this would be the front cover of the page of the sectional. And so again, it tells me what days it's valid, 8 September 2022 to 3 November 2022. So if I go over here to the FAA's website, September to November. So that aligns. We know that this is the most current VFR sectional. And then it shows us, just gives us a little shaded in box here showing exactly what sectional that we're looking at here. And then if you come down here, it's got, you know, some information about how to plot points from point A to point B, that kind of stuff. But really what's important here is that you've got some control tower frequencies. So any airport that is on the chart that has a control tower, they'll give you some more information about that particular control tower. So it could be, you know, if we're looking at the Appleton International Airport, we know that it operates from 0530 to 2300 local time. Tower frequency is 119.6, ground is 121.7, and ATIS is 127.15. Now, this is very helpful if you think about this. Again, if you had a printed version of this, you know, in the cockpit with you, then you could very easily come over here and say, okay, I need to divert to Appleton. There's some weather, you know, I need to know the tower frequency. I need to know ATIS and I need to know tower. And so if you needed to divert very quickly because of, you know, deteriorating weather conditions or something happens and you need to make an unplanned landing, because when you do your cross-country planning, you should have all this information planned out for your destination airport, but sometimes things happen. So you've got this information available to you right in the cockpit. And then they've got some information here about the different Class B, Class C TERSAs and selected approach control frequencies. So one thing I do want to show you a TERSA. If we go over here to the Chicago sectional, let's see here, zoom in. There's one TERSA that I know of in the United States. Right here is Rockford, Illinois. A TERSA is a terminal radar services area. It is a Class Delta airport with radar services. And it's left over from the old airspace system that was transitioned in the 90s. But if you see anything about a TERSA, that's what this is. So you can see that you've got the dotted blue lines here indicate that it's, or dashed blue lines here indicate that it is a Class Delta airport. And then the gray circles here, the gray rings here indicate that it's a TERSA. So you might get some questions on that, or you might see that. So let's go back here. I want to go back to my Green Bay sectional on the margins here. Okay, so the other things that you'll see is any sort of prohibited, restricted, special use airspace that is on that chart. So there'll be like, so for example, here there's prohibited airspace, P204 is the name of the prohibited airspace. It'll be identified on the chart. You can just come over here and get some information about it. So for example, if we look at the restricted area 6903, it'll be labeled that on the chart. It's the altitude is two flight level 450. And it's active intermittent by NOTAM. So you'll know that if you have to fly through that restricted area, you're going to want to make sure to check the NOTAMs, get the NOTAMs and see if that area is active. And if you needed to talk to somebody in flight, you could contact Minneapolis Center then at 128.6. Okay, so it gives you all the information. It's not going to put it necessarily on the chart because that would really start to clutter up the chart. So you can get a lot of information here out of the margins of the sectional. And then there's just some, other information, for you as well. So, flight following services are available on request around Class Bravo, Charlie, and TERSA areas. There's severe turbulence over rugged terrain. There's some good information here for you. Make sure that you come down here and you always want to read them. So you start with where you're flying, or maybe, like I said, maybe like the city that you're very comfortable with. So that is the margins and the legend of the charts. Do you have any questions on that so far? We're going to go over the legend here in a little bit more detail. Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the legend. So the legend has got a lot of really good information for you. And we're not going to go through it like line by line or anything here, but I want to just kind of point out some of the major things. And I'm actually going to go back over to SkyVector just because I can zoom in a little bit more, make it much more clear. So when you're looking at the different airports that are on the sectional charts, you can tell a little bit of information about that airport just by the information that they put right on the sectional. So you might not necessarily be able to look up things from the chart supplement while you're in flight. So the FAA publishes some of this information right on the chart because again, it's assumed that you're using this in flight and that you need to have that information readily available for you. So, for example, you can look at the shape of the airport. If it's a circle, a outline of a circle, we know that it's not a hard surfaced runway. It could be gravel, it could be grass, it could be dirt. It's something other than hard surfaced. Then we've also got the little anchor here, shows us where there's a seaplane base. And then if you look at like these two right here are, it's a circle with the runways inside there. It's indicating to us that it's a hard surface runway and that they range from 1,500 feet to 8,069 feet in length. And I know there's a reason for that 8,069 feet, and I cannot remember what it is off the top of my head. I was thinking about that today, but for whatever reason, it's 8,069 feet in length. And then if it's just sort of this outline of the runway, we know that it's a hard surface runway greater than 8,069 feet, or there might be some multiple runways less than 8,069 feet. So you can get a little bit of information about the airport just by looking at the shape there. And then if we've got this dot, it indicates that there's some radio aids to navigation. So something like a VOR, a DME, or a VORTAC is going to be available at that particular airport. Then you've got some of these other different types of airports, such as the private airports. The circle R indicates that it's a private airport. You can use, it's not a public use airport, but it's helpful to know that because if there's an emergency and you need to land there, or if you're using it sort of as a checkpoint on one of your cross countries, it's valuable information to have there. The double circles here indicate that it's a military airport. We've got helioports with the H. An unverified meet just means like, the FAA knows it's there, but they don't necessarily have a lot of details about it. Abandoned airports are oftentimes useful to know as well. You might not necessarily want to use it as an emergency landing situation. You don't always know what kind of condition that runway is in, but you can use that also as a checkpoint if you're trying to use navigate by references on the ground. And then we've also got the F indicates an ultralight flight park. And like I said earlier, these little tick points, that means that fuel is going to be available on the field, but you don't necessarily know what hours they are. It might not be 24-hour self-service fuel. It might just be, somebody that maybe they have a line service personnel there, between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m., something like that. So you don't necessarily get that information off the chart, but you do know that there's fuel available. And then the little star here indicates that there's a rotating beacon there. So then the additional information that you see on the airport is going to be listed in this way. All right. So rather than going through this all in a line here, what I'm going to do is we're just going to go over to an airport and take a look at it. So let's come back over here to Oshkosh. So the way your airport information is spelled out on the sectional chart, it's going to be the same for every airport. It's going to be in the same order, but there might be different information there just depending on the particular airport. So for example, the Oshkosh Airport, it's called the Whitman Regional Airport. It's got the ICAO identifier right here. We've got the CTAF frequency. I'm sorry, the control tower is 118.5. The star is going to indicate that it's part-time control tower. Then we've got the CTAF and ATIS is 125.9. The airport elevation is 808 feet. There's intermittent lighting on the airport. The star L means there's intermittent lighting available. The 80 means the length of the longest runway is 8,000 feet. And then our Unicom frequency is 122.95. Okay. So if you can't remember, if you're looking at a particular airport and you can't remember what it is, what does this mean? Or they've got some sort of weird thing that you just haven't seen before, what do? You come over here to the legend. And then this is where you get all that information here. So it tells you, you might see something that says no SVFR, no special VFR. There might not be special VFR allowed at that particular airport or able to have at that particular airport. You might have a weather camera. You might see these in Alaska. It might be an airport of entry. You might have a right pattern at that particular airport. So this is going to give you all of the information that if, most of these are really, sort of standard, but every once in a while you'll see something that's a little, just off the wall and you can't figure out what it is, come over to the chart. If you're on your check ride, you're meeting with the examiner and the examiner points out something on the chart and you're not certain what it is, the first thing you should do is come over here and look at this legend. All right, so that is airport information. Any questions there? Okay, next let's talk about latitude and longitude and how to identify that. If we come back over here, I'm going to zoom out. We're going to go back over to this direction here. Oops, sorry. So latitude and longitude, you will probably get questions about this on your written exam. And what it will likely be is you'll get a question from this chart supplement, testing supplement here. They'll give you a chart, it'll be turned to this page, and it will say something like, what is the latitude and longitude of this tower right here? Or what is the latitude and longitude of Brillion? Something like that. And then you'll have to figure out what the latitude and longitudes are for that particular point on the chart. So if you look, just kind of get rid of all of the clutter here on the chart, you'll see that there is a grid. Okay, so there's all these black lines here that go horizontal and vertical. Okay, those are your lines of latitude and longitude. All right, so each one of these represents a certain degree of latitude north or longitude west, because we're in North America, so it's generally going to be north and west. Okay, so right here, this one is labeled 44 degrees. So if I come up and look a little further to the north here, we've got another black line right here, but there's no label to it at all. Okay, so then what I want to do is come up here to the next line, and this one's labeled 45 degrees. All right, so I know, if I zoom out here a little bit, this is 44 degrees north right here. This is 44 degrees, 30 minutes north. And then this is going to be 45 degrees north. All right. Then each one of these individual ticks in between here is going to represent 1 minute north. All right. So this is going to be 44 degrees, 1 minute north, 2 minutes north, 3 minutes north, all the way up to 30 minutes north right here. And then we're at 45 minutes north. Okay. And then the same goes likewise for our longitude. So right here, this line right here indicates 88 degrees west. Okay. And then we've got our next line is right here, but it's not labeled anything. And then our next line right here is 89 degrees. All right. So we know that halfway in between there is going to be 88 degrees, 30 minutes. Okay. So if I'm going to find the latitude, longitude of this plant right here, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can either start from 45 degrees north and count backwards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so. So it might be 44 degrees, 56, 53 minutes north. Or what you could do is you could count up from this 30 minutes. You could count 31, 32, 33, and so on until you get up here. Okay. And then the same goes to find the line of longitude. I can count here, I can count backwards from 88 degrees, 30 minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or so. So about 88 degrees, 20 minutes, because I'm subtracting from the 30. 30 minus 10 is 20, right? Or you can count forward from 88 degrees, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. All right. The best way that I always think to remember how to do latitude and longitude is to look for these labels. And then from there, you can very easily figure it out. Like if you look right here, if I were to ask you, what is the latitude, longitude of Black Creek? It's going to be very difficult to figure that out because you don't have those labels there. So what you want to do is make sure that you zoom out just a little bit, get those labels, and then you can count and you can figure that out. And then in each one of these quadrants that you get with your lines of latitude and longitude. You see this square here, and you got a square here. There's this number in the middle of each of those quadrants, okay? And if I go back to my margins here, this chart contains maximum elevation figures. So the maximum elevation figures shown in quadrangles, bounded by ticks lines of latitude and longitude, are represented in thousands and hundreds of feet above mean sea level. The MEF is based on information available concerning the highest known feature in each quadrangle, including terrain and obstructions. So trees, towers, antennas. Out here in Arizona, we've got mountains, things like that. So for example, this is written with a 12 and a small 5, so that means 12,500 feet, okay? So in each one of these quadrangles or quadrants has one of those numbers. And what that means then, so like here's a quadrant right here. We've got the 1 and the 9. So what that means is that at 1,900 feet, you have clearance of all of the obstacles in that particular quadrant. Okay, so that's above all of any of the towers, any of radio antennas. If there's any mountains, you'll have clearance over all of that. Okay, so like right here, for example, it's 2,200. Wisconsin's pretty flat. Okay, so I mean, you're not going to see too much of a difference here. When you get out west where there's mountains, this is where you're going to see quite a big difference. So if we come out here and look at Phoenix, for example, it's Las Vegas, but that'll work. Right over here, we've got 6,100 in this quadrangle. We've got 8,500 in this quadrangle. Look at over here, we've got 12,300 in this quadrangle. So we know that there's mountains there. And so that's very useful, especially for flying at night. Mountains don't have lights on them. And so it's helpful to know that if you're flying in this quadrangle, as long as you stay above 12,300 feet, you'll have clearance over those mountains. All right. So that is our latitude and longitude and the information that you can gather from that. Any questions there? Okay, we're going to do a really super quick review of the National Airspace System. It's totally okay if you have not learned airspace yet, totally okay. This is not intended to be a lesson on airspace, but I want to show you how to identify some of these different kinds of airspace in the sectional charts. So the National Airspace System is going to be all of the airspace, any navigation facilities, so any of like your VORs, your DMEs, GPSs, things like that, and then the airports themselves. And there are some pieces to the airspace system that are shared jointly with the US military. As I've shown you in the chart legend, there's actually a symbol for a military airport. We have both controlled and uncontrolled airspace, and then we have 6 different classes of airspace. My dog is begging me for some attention here. And we've also got some special use airspace, and then there's other types of airspace. We could spend, easily 2 or 3 hours talking about airspace here. So we've got uncontrolled and controlled airspace, not to be confused with towered and non-towered airports, okay? So we've got controlled airspace. This is telling us where there are air traffic control services provided. Just because there's not a control tower at that airport does not mean that there's not air traffic control services provided, especially when you get into your instrument training. You'll be very intricately aware of some of those services that are available. And the level of service is really going to depend on that class of airspace. So again, just remember there's controlled airspace and uncontrolled airspace, but that's very different from a towered airport and a non-towered airport. And I'm just setting that stage because when we get here to looking at the charts, it's gonna make a little bit of a difference here. And then just as a reminder, if we're looking at airspace, from sort of the side view, this is what it looks like, where we've got maybe a non-towered airport that's in Class E airspace. We could have a non-towered airport that's in Class G airspace. We've got Class Bravo airspace and Class Charlie airspace that look like the upside down wedding cake, where you've got the different layers and the different rings that come out. And then you've got your Class Delta airspace, which is going to just simply be like a cylinder shape that it's going to go straight up, generally speaking. And then all around there is where you've got your Class Echo airspace. And then from 18,000 feet MSL to flight level 600, you've got your Class Alpha airspace. And I'm going to, we'll talk very briefly about special use airspace. You'll see that identified on the sectional charts. You'll see it in prohibited areas, restricted areas, there's warning areas. You have MOAs or military operations areas, and then you have alert areas. Those you're going to see on charts. There's also controlled firing areas, but you're not necessarily going to see those on charts. And then you've got other different types of airspace that some of these you're going to see on charts, some of these you're not going to see on charts. You might see some military training routes on charts. You're not going to see TFRs or temporary flight restrictions on charts. There's VFR routes, Victor Airways, the TERSAs, we talked about TERSAs, there's special flight rules areas. Again, we could spend a full hour talking about the airspace around Washington, DC, because it's got all this stuff there. So that's just really, really quickly on airspace, okay? So if we go back over to the legend, it's got all of the information that we need to know about the different types of airspace. So it's all color coded. So this is why I'm saying when you're buying your testing supplement, buy it in color, because you need to be able to differentiate between the magenta and the blue. You'll see the magenta and the blue quite frequently on your charts. So what I would like to do is bring up right here. So right here, we're looking at, this is, I think this is Chicago. Is that what I made a screenshot of? Yes, Chicago. So this is the Chicago airspace. So I'm going to bring it up on here just because I can zoom in and make it much more clear for you guys to see. So this is the Chicago airspace. This is a Class Bravo airspace. And so it looks very, very, very cluttered. And so you can see why this white line is around here to show us that there is a terminal area chart available for the Chicago airspace. So it's going to be much more, you're able to zoom in much better and get rid of some of the clutter. So it's a little easier to read. But for what you need to know for right now, for the Class Bravo airspace on the charts, is that you identify it using the solid blue lines here. Okay, so you've got these rings. These indicate the upside down wedding ring, all right, or wedding cake. We always talk about the upside down wedding cake. That's what those rings are that we see on the charts, all right? So this first ring right here is going to be the first where the airport is. So you can get all the information about the airport. There's no special VFR allowed here. You can see all of the different frequencies that are used here. You got all the information about ATIS, the elevation, the length of the runway. 122.95 is the Unicom frequency. It's got all that information about the airport there, okay? You could tell some information about the length of the runways, there's a rotating beacon available. So you can see all that information about the O'Hare Airport. Now, if you look in this first ring right here, this is telling me that the Class Bravo airspace extends from the surface. So it starts at the surface of the ground up to 10,000 feet, up to and including 10,000 feet. Okay. Then when we get outside of this ring, we have our second ring right here. All right. And when we're in this ring right here, the Class Bravo airspace starts at 1,900 feet and extends up to 10,000 feet, up to and including 10,000 feet. All right. So if we're flying along at 1,800 feet, we're flying underneath the Class Bravo airspace here. All right. But you can see right here, there's a little cutout right here because we have a Class Delta airport right here. And the Class Delta airport's identified by this blue dotted line right here. Okay. So again, if you can't remember what that is, you go look at the legend and it'll tell you the blue dash line indicates it is a Class Delta airport. Now, again, you can tell information about that particular airport. You can tell information about the length of the runways. There's beacon, there's fuel services there. You can see right here, we've got this square right here with the -30 in there, all right? So generally, when you look at a Class Delta airport, like for example, let's look at this one down here is Aurora. We've got this square with a 32 in there. So the square with the 32 in there indicates that the Class Delta airport airspace goes from the surface up to and including 3,200 feet, okay? But when we've got the negative sign here, it means that the Class Delta airspace extends from the surface up to, but not including 3,000 feet. All right, because then we're running into our Class Bravo airspace here. So then this next ring, you can even see like there's a little spot right here where they've got it zoomed in here. They got an arrow pointing in there where it's 2,500 feet to 10,000 feet. And then in this ring, it's 3,000 feet to 10,000 feet. This ring is 3,600 feet to 10,000 feet. This ring is 4,000 feet to 10,000 feet. Okay. And then if you look, let's see here, right here, you've got this spot that sort of extends out right here. And we've got a line right here that kind of breaks up this ring right here. Okay. So you've got sort of a weird shape to the wedding cake. But the bottom of the Class Bravo airspace here is 4,000 feet to 10,000 feet, whereas up here it's 3,600 feet. So you could be flying along right here at, 3,700 feet. I'm sorry, 3,300 feet, and you're going to be below the Class Bravo airspace. But right here, you could be flying along at, 3,700 feet. You're below the Class Bravo airspace, but as soon as you cross this line, now you're in that Class Bravo airspace. All right. So you as a student pilot, you're not going to fly in Class Bravo airspace, but you'll probably you might get questions about it on your oral exam. You might even get some questions about it on your written exam. My suggestion is just sit down and, again, look at your testing supplement and just study those charts that are in your testing supplement. Study the charts that are at the airports nearest you as well. One other thing about the Class Bravo airspace I want to mention is that there is a Mode C veil around Class Bravo airspace. So this solid magenta line indicates that within 30 nautical miles, your aircraft needs to have a Mode C transponder and ADS-B out capabilities, okay? So you might not even necessarily even be intending to fly in the Class Bravo airspace. You might be intending to stay low enough, or you're gonna stay outside the ring. But if you're flying within that veil, you do need to have that capability on your airplane. All right, so that is Class Bravo airspace and how you identify it. Questions there? Oh, sorry about that. All right, the next one let's go over is Class Charlie airspace. Again, you identify Class Charlie airspace by this solid magenta line right here. And the inner circle of our Class Charlie airspace, it's the same thing as Class Bravo, only different colors, okay, and less rings. Surface to 4,700 feet is going to be our Class Charlie airspace. And Milwaukee is interesting because they break up the outside ring by the shoreline. So for example, on the water, the Class Charlie airspace starts at 1,900 feet and extends up to 4,700 feet. But on the over land, it starts at 2,200 feet and extends up to 4,700 feet. Okay, so know that you could be flying around down here, maybe at 2,100 feet, and then as soon as you get out over the shoreline, you're in that Class Charlie airspace. These flags right here, and again, if you can't remember what that is, it's going to be in your legend, but there's these different flags with a word that is in capital black letters underlined. And you can use those as checkpoints when you're talking to air traffic control, and they will know what you mean. They'll know where it is. They know what you mean by that. So if you contact Milwaukee Tower, you've already been in contact with Milwaukee Approach because you've contacted them outside of the airspace. But now you've been handed off to Milwaukee Tower. You can tell them that you're over the filtration plant, and they will know what that means. Or down here, if you contact Milwaukee Approach, you tell them you're over Racine, they know what that means. Hales Corners, all these different checkpoints are things that the air traffic control will know exactly where you're talking about if you use those as checkpoints. So you'll see those a lot around Class Charlie and Class Bravo airspace. You do see them around the Oshkosh airport as well. I think they're there just because of the air show. But you'll see those around Class Bravo and Class Charlie airspace. And then if we go and let's talk about Class Delta. So we'll come up here. I'm going to use Appleton as an example here for this one. So we've got our Appleton Airport here. It's Class Delta. I know that because it's got the blue dashed line here. And then we can tell a little bit about the airport just based on the shape here. We've got fuel. We've got a beacon. Airspace extends up to and including 3,400 feet. We've got some towers, some obstacles. Looks like there's a water tank here, some water tanks over here as well. It tells us exactly what the height is of those water tanks. And then I've got information about the airport here as well. So it's Appleton International Airport. I got the ICAO code, tower frequency is 119.6. ATIS is 127.15, elevations 918. We've got lighting, 8,000 foot runway, and 122.95 is your Unicom. All right, so a lot of really good information that you can get there. And then let's go up here to Clintonville. This is actually the airport I took a tour of in kindergarten. It's Clintonville Airport. So this is where you get some Class Echo transition areas. So Class Echo airspace comes down to 1,200 feet. So if we're flying around out here, Class Echo airspace is, 1,200 feet. And then below that, we're in Class Gulf, right? But over here, these are transition areas because these are airports that they have some sort of published instrument procedures. So the radar services or air traffic control services will go down a little bit lower to a little bit of a lower altitude. So that Class Echo airspace then will drop down to 700 feet instead of the 1,200 feet. So if you're flying along and you're flying an approach here and you're coming in and you're flying along and from right here, the Class Echo airspace is 1,200 feet. You get in here, your Class Echo airspace extends down to 700 feet. All right, so those are those transition areas. If you come up a little further north, you'll see a transition area that extends all the way down to the surface. So when you get the dotted magenta line, that Class Echo airspace extends all the way down to the surface. So now we have a Class Echo airport right here because the Echo airspace extends all the way down to the ground. All right, so we've got this transition area where we go from 1,200 to 700 down to the surface. Okay. So that is how to identify the different types of airspace. You don't necessarily see, you don't see Class Alpha airspace on charts just because it's up at 18,000 feet. So it's not going to be charted. Some of your special use airspace, you're going to see a lot over here in Washington, DC. Again, we could spend an hour just talking about the Washington, DC airspace. You've got prohibited areas, restricted areas here. They're identified by these identifiers here. We've got the flight restricted zone right here within Washington, DC proper. And then if you come out over here over the coast here, you can see the ADIS. So that's where that sort of airspace sort of transitions from, US to international sort of coastal airspace. So that's generally where you're going to see the ADIS is around the border of the country. So I had PowerPoints there, but it was much easier to just zoom in on, get you a better view here. So obstacles, we talked about obstacles. And then the last thing I want to talk about is terrain. So terrain is indicated on the charts. Again, when you're flying over the Midwest, the area is pretty flat, but you get to the western part of the country and even some parts of the eastern part of the country, we do have mountains, okay? And so there's a couple different ways that you can identify mountains on your chart. The first are going to be these contour lines. So if you see these individual lines here, we've got one that's indicated as 33,000 right here. One is 3,500 right here. And the closer they are together, the steeper that's going to be. It's going to show us that we have a mountain. And then we've got color coding to show us the highest elevation of that particular terrain. So if we come back over here to Sky Vector, let's go look at the western half of the country, come into California, Nevada, that area here. You can see that there's just darker color coding here that indicates to us that there's mountains there. Okay, so if I zoom in on it, I'm in the Owens Moa here. Let's see here, right here, 10,000 feet is on this line. 9,500 feet on this line right here, 9,000 feet on this line, 11,500 feet. So this is going to be some pretty steep mountains right here. They're pretty close together and they get closer and closer together as they get up to the top because it looks like it's a very steep mountain here. And then the color coding indicates, the darker the brown it gets, that's the higher the elevation is. So if you're flying around in this particular area, again, in this quadrangle, 14,800 feet, that's going to give you clearance over the top of that mountain. Down here, it's 13,300 feet to get you clearance over the top of that mountain. All right. So that is a really, really, really super quick crash course on how to read sectional charts. Again, your examiner, when you are sitting down for your check ride, your examiner will probably pick up some really obscure thing and see if you can figure out what it is. So
My cellular data is working now.
You sure?
Yeah, thank you. You're so sweet. No, thanks.
Later, if you want later, okay?
Okay, thank you. So make sure, again, the first thing you always want to do is go look at that legend. And, when you do have your check ride, again, most examiners are still asking that you're doing this on paper. So again, if you have a question, you're not sure, rather than saying, I don't know, go look at that legend, that chart legend, to see if you can try to figure it out there. And then for your written exam, make sure you get a copy of this Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement and study those charts in there. You'll get questions about a particular airport, on one of these charts. They're just like what you would see here on Sky Vector and ForeFlight, just in a book format. So any questions? I know it was a lot. It was sort of this, fire hose. Like I said, it was sort of a crash course on how to read sectional charts. I'm here to answer questions.
The book was the Airman Knowledge. What is it? Airman Knowledge.
It's called
what?
the Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement for
Testing
sport
supplement.
pilot, recreational pilot, remote pilot, and private pilot. It's,
Okay,
I
awesome.
don't know why my camera's not picking it up here.
I got it on Amazon.
There we go.
Free.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you
and
guys.
if you get it on Amazon, make sure you get the color copy of it.
In color.
I accidentally bought a black and white one, and you can't read the charts if they're black and white. There's
Okay,
a lot
awesome.
color coded there.
Do you feel like this is something that, did you kind of have some knowledge about this? You talk about it so confidently. Like, how long as a student do you feel like we should be picking this stuff up, like time-wise? Because it seems like a foreign language right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, it will. It's totally, and that's totally normal. Like I said, it's you're going from the highway system, which is one dimension, right? And now
Yeah.
you're going into this world of airspace where now you're operating in 3 dimensions. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Right.
it's new. So my suggestion is always, depending on where you live, if you're not already taking flying lessons, just pick out the chart from where you live and just study it. Just take a look at it and be like, okay, I know where those train tracks are. I drive over those every day. I know what highway that is. I drive it to go to my grandma's house. You don't see a lot of highways on here just because it does get cluttered, but they'll put interstate highways on here. And just study it. And if you are already taking flying lessons, study the area where you're taking flying lessons. And I'm saying that just because sometimes the area that you might be most comfortable with might not always be the same spot where you're taking flying lessons.
Right. Right.
So like, if you've got an area where you've just spent a lot of time there, come over here to Sky Vector and find it on the chart. You might find out about airports in your area that you didn't even know existed,
Okay.
and just start studying it. And the best way to learn how to use these is just to do it. Start, especially once you start planning cross countries and doing cross country flights. It'll start coming a lot quicker just because you are actually applying it.
Okay.
So is this just is this website, the Sky Vector is just a website that?
Yep, it's free. You can come here. It's really cool. I've got some stuff turned off here. But if I click on layers, you can bring up, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here so you can kind of see the country as a whole, but you can bring up text weather. So if you want to look up METARs and TAFs, you can click on them and it will bring up the METAR and the TAF if you've learned how to read aviation weather. It'll bring up any sort of temporary flight restrictions that we have in place. So there's a couple in place. Looks like there's probably president or vice president right here. This is the Washington TFR. We've got some TFRs around the border. Looks like maybe there might be some fires or something over here. DROTMs are NOTAMs for drone pilots. So they'll tell you anything that's happening around the world of drones. Their UAS is unmanned aircraft systems. And then you can get PIREPs, pilot reports. You can get that off of here. You can get SIGMETs, AirMets. You can see, it tells you, okay, there's moderate to severe turbulence here. You click on it and it gives you the actual SIGMET, tells you what it is. So you can bring up any AirMets too. We're starting to get in that season where we're seeing icing, stuff like that. So it's a really cool website. I suggest just getting in here, playing around with it. And, like I said, pick a spot that you know really well and study it.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions? I'm glad to do this with you guys. This is
How
exciting.
long did it take you to start to feel comfortable with all this?
Um,
This part.
the reading charts.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say once I did my first couple of cross countries
Okay.
is what I would say. And even like, you know, like I said, I took flying lessons in Wisconsin. I've lived in other parts of the country, so I've flown. I used to live in Maryland. I used to live over here in this messy airspace, right? And I would just sit here and like, so in order to fly in the DC area, you have to take a class with the FAA. There's a lot of stuff you have to do.
Yeah.
But I would just sit here and like just study this chart right here. The airport I flew out of was right here, Gaithersburg. And like I would just I would just study this chart like crazy. And then what I did was even though I was already a CFI, I had a lot of flying experience, but when I got out here, I had people come with me just because I was making sure
Yeah.
that I wasn't busting airspace.
Yeah, when you get into the different layers, that gets spicy.
It does. And you know, so I live in Phoenix now, and we have a group of CFIs here that, you know, we're really, you know, the airspace out here is very congested. You know, it's Class Bravo airspace, but we've got a lot of other little airports, Class Delta airports and other airports. And there's a lot of flight training that happens out here. The
Mhm.
weather's, I mean, we have VFR weather, you know, 350 days out of the year. So we have a lot of flight training out here. So there'll be, you know, our FAA safety team will do, you know, like webinars and presentations and that kind of stuff on just to help people feel a little bit more comfortable with the airspace. We're planning something, the Super Bowl's out here in January. So we're planning something to help people that they're flying in for the Super Bowl,
Mhm.
help them just feel a little bit more comfortable with the airspace. So if depending on where you are, you might want to, you know, look and see if your FAA safety team has any sort of, you know, webinars that they do or you know,
Right.
presentations that they give, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Because they'll get very specific about the particulars of your particular airspace for sure.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, you said you had a podcast. What's your podcast?
Oh, it's called, yeah, it's called Let's Learn to Fly.
Let's Learn to Fly.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I started it as a COVID project.
Okay.
And it was called Discover Drones. I was really focusing on drones. And I've just started in the last 2 months adding more airplane related content. So when you go and look at it, you'll see a lot of drone stuff, but know that I'm adding a lot more stuff for people getting their sport pilot and private pilot.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very
I
cool.
love talking about, I can talk about this stuff forever. So
I love it. We appreciate it a ton.
Yeah.
yes. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. This is a lot of fun and I'm glad to be here. And I hope, you know, hopefully I'll be able to do this again with you guys sometime soon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going to go check
Yeah.
out your podcast and thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your evening.
You too.
You as well.
Thanks,
Bye.
Heather.